Most of you don't fail because life is hard. You fail because you're soft. You start strong for 3 days, maybe a week, then disappear like you never meant it. You call it losing motivation. I call it what it really is, lack of identity. You don't know who you are, so you borrow energy, you fake discipline, and when that fake runs out, you collapse. That's your reality. Not unlucky, not confused, weak. You've been lied to. You think consistency is about willpower, about forcing yourself to act. Wrong. Willpower is temporary. It burns out. Real consistency comes from something far deeper, something most people are too scared to touch. It comes from what I call speaking in tongues, not in some mystical nonsense way, but in a psychological dominant sense. It's when your internal voice changes language. When your mind stops negotiating and starts commanding. Right now, your internal voice is weak. It asks, should I work today? It negotiates, maybe later. That's the language of losers. Speaking in tongues means you eliminate that voice entirely. You replace it with a new code, a new language, one that doesn't ask questions, it gives orders. You train, you execute, you finish. No emotion, no hesitation, just command and action. And here's the part you won't like. You can't fake this. You can't watch a few videos and suddenly become disciplined. This is identity surgery. You have to kill the old version of yourself, the one who quits, the one who hesitates, the one who waits to feel ready. That version of you is the enemy, and until you destroy him, you will never be consistent. Discipline isn't something you build. It's something you become. When you truly shift your identity, consistency stops being hard. It becomes automatic. A lion doesn't wake up and debate whether to hunt. That's what it is, and that's what you're missing. You're still acting like a man who has options, like you can choose comfort or effort. Powerful men don't have that choice. Their standard is fixed. Speaking in tongues is that moment when your internal dialogue upgrades, when weakness is no longer part of your vocabulary, when I don't feel like it sounds foreign, disgusting, unacceptable. That's when you cross the line. That's when discipline becomes permanent. Not because it's easy, but because anything else feels impossible. You keep telling yourself you need more motivation, but that's not the real problem. Motivation is cheap. It comes and goes, spikes for a moment, then disappears the second things get uncomfortable. The real issue is that you haven't decided who you are. Without a fixed identity, your behavior will always be unstable. You'll act based on feelings, not standards. And feelings are unreliable. One bad night of sleep, one distraction, one inconvenience, and you're off track again. Look closely at your patterns. You start strong when you feel inspired, when everything is fresh, when the idea of change excites you. But the moment that emotional fuel fades, so do you. That's because you're operating like someone who is trying instead of someone who is. There's a massive difference between the two. A man who is trying to be disciplined will eventually fail. A man who sees himself as disciplined doesn't even consider failure an option. His actions aren't dependent on mood. They are aligned with identity. Right now, your identity is undefined. You haven't set a non-negotiable standard for yourself. You say things like, I want to be consistent, but wanting is weak language. Wanting leaves room for escape. It leaves space for excuses. It allows you to step back the moment things get hard. When your identity is clear, there is no space. There is no gap between decision and action. You don't wake up and ask whether you feel like working. You execute, because that's what someone like you does. This is where most people fall apart. They try to fix their actions without fixing their identity. They build routines, set goals, create plans. But underneath it all, they're still the same person. The same mindset, the same habits, the same internal dialogue, so eventually everything collapses back to the default. You don't rise to the level of your goals. You fall to the level of your identity. And if your identity is weak, your results will reflect that every single time. Changing your identity is not comfortable. It requires you to confront the version of yourself that you've been protecting. The one that procrastinates, the one that avoids pressure, the one that looks for easy ways out. You have to be honest enough to admit that version of you is the problem. Not your circumstances, not your environment, you. And until you take full ownership of that, nothing changes. Once you make that shift, everything becomes simpler. Not easier, but clearer. Decisions stop being emotional and start being automatic. You don't waste energy debating whether to act, because the answer is already built into who you are. You become predictable in your discipline, consistent in your execution, and dangerous in your focus. Not because you're forcing it, but because it's now part of your nature. This is the level most people never reach. They stay stuck chasing motivation, hoping for the next burst of energy to carry them forward. But energy fades, identity stays. And if you don't build that foundation, you'll keep repeating the same cycle, starting, stopping, regretting while watching others move forward with certainty and control. You keep saying you're trying to be disciplined, and that's exactly why you're failing. Trying is a loophole. It's a soft word designed to protect your ego when you don't follow through. It gives you permission to fall short while still feeling like you made an effort. But effort without enforcement is meaningless. The world doesn't reward what you intended to do, it rewards what you execute. Consistently, without excuses. Discipline is not a feeling you wait for. It's a standard you impose. The moment you rely on how you feel, you've already surrendered control. Because your feelings are unstable, unpredictable, and easily influenced. One moment you're motivated, the next you're distracted, tired, or bored. If your actions depend on that emotional state, your performance will always fluctuate. An inconsistent performance produces average results, nothing more. Look at how you negotiate with yourself. You wake up and immediately start a conversation in your head. Maybe I'll do it later. I'll start after I feel better. I deserve a break today. That internal dialogue is not harmless, it's destructive. Every time you allow it, you reinforce a pattern of hesitation, and hesitation kills momentum. The more you hesitate, the harder it becomes to act. Eventually, inaction becomes your default. Enforcement eliminates that conversation entirely. It replaces negotiation with command. There is no maybe, no later, no if I feel like it. There is only action. You train because it's scheduled. You work because it's required. You execute because that's the standard you've set. Whether you feel ready or not becomes irrelevant. You move anyway. That's the difference between someone who controls his life and someone who reacts to it. This is where most people break. They think discipline is about pushing themselves when they feel motivated, when conditions are perfect, when everything aligns. But real discipline shows up when nothing aligns. When you're tired, when you're distracted, when you'd rather do anything else. That's the moment that defines you. Not when it's easy, but when it's uncomfortable and you still execute without hesitation. You don't rise by making things easier. You rise by making your standards stricter. When you enforce discipline, you remove the option to fail. You design your life in a way where the only acceptable outcome is completion. You stop asking for permission from your emotions and start giving orders to your actions. That shift alone separates average men from those who dominate in every area of life. Understand this clearly. Discipline enforced daily becomes identity. The more you follow through, the more you prove to yourself that you are someone who executes regardless of circumstance. That builds confidence, not the kind that comes from words, but the kind that comes from evidence. You trust yourself because you've seen what you do under pressure, and that trust is power. If you're still relying on motivation, you're playing a losing game. Motivation fades, energy drops, distractions multiply. But standards don't change. Rules don't bend. When you enforce discipline, you remove uncertainty from your life. You become consistent not by chance, but by design. And once that system is in place, progress becomes inevitable because there is no longer a version of you that quits when things get hard. There's a voice in your head that sounds like you, but it's not your ally. It's your limiter. It whispers just enough doubt to slow you down, just enough comfort to keep you average. It doesn't scream failure, it suggests delay. It doesn't tell you to quit, it tells you to wait. And that subtle difference is exactly why it's so dangerous. You don't notice the damage in real time, but over weeks and months, it erodes your consistency until there's nothing left. Pay attention to the language it uses. Either start later. I'm not ready yet. I need to think about it. That isn't logic, it's avoidance disguised as reasoning. It sounds rational, even responsible, but it leads to the same outcome every time: inaction. And every time you obey that voice, you reinforce it. You make it stronger, more convincing, more automatic. Eventually, you stop questioning it altogether. You just follow. Most people never challenge that voice because they think it's part of them. They assume it's their natural thought process. It isn't. It's conditioning. It's built from years of choosing comfort over pressure, ease over effort, delay over execution. You train that voice through repetition. And now it runs on autopilot, guiding your decisions without resistance. Here's the problem. You treat that voice like it deserves a vote. You let it enter the conversation as if it has equal authority. It doesn't. It's not designed to make you better. It's designed to keep you safe. And safety in this context means stagnation. It means avoiding risk, avoiding discomfort, avoiding growth. If you continue to listen to it, you will remain exactly where you are. Control starts when you separate yourself from that voice, when you recognize that not every thought deserves your attention. Just because something appears in your mind doesn't mean it's valid. Strong men don't obey every impulse. They filter, override, and command. They decide which thoughts matter and which ones get ignored. You need to replace that weak internal dialogue with something sharper, more direct, more authoritative, not emotional, not dramatic, precise. Instead of asking, you instruct. Instead of debating, you decide. The moment the voice says later, you respond with action. The moment it suggests delay, you move immediately. You don't give it time to grow. You cut it off at the source. This isn't about positive thinking, it's about disciplined thinking. You're not trying to feel better. You're trying to operate better. That requires control. It requires awareness. It requires the ability to interrupt patterns that have been running for years and replace them with something stronger. At first, it will feel unnatural. You'll notice resistance. That voice will get louder, more persistent, more creative in its excuses. That's expected. You're breaking a system that's been in place for a long time, but every time you override it, you weaken it. Every time you act despite it, you take back control. And over time, the balance shifts. The voice loses authority and your command takes over. This is the difference between someone who drifts through life and someone who directs it. One reacts to thoughts, the other controls them. One hesitates, the other executes. If you don't take control of your internal voice, it will control your outcomes. And it will do it quietly, consistently, and without mercy until you realize too late that you've been living below your potential the entire time. You keep failing for one simple reason. You've given yourself too many exits. You built a life full of backup plans, safety nets, and soft landings. Then you wonder why you never go all in. When there's always another option, there's never real pressure. And without pressure, there is no performance. You don't rise because you don't have to. You fall back because it's available. Look at how you structure your decisions. You say you're committed, but in the same breath, you leave space to quit. If it gets too hard, I'll take a break. If it doesn't work, I'll try something else. That language is poison. It sounds logical, even responsible, but it destroys intensity. It removes urgency. It tells your mind that full effort is optional. And the moment effort becomes optional, consistency disappears. People like to believe that having options is power. In reality, too many options create weakness. They divide your focus. They dilute your commitment. You start thinking instead of doing, analyzing instead of executing. You hesitate because you know you can switch paths at any moment. And that hesitation compounds. It slows you down, breaks your rhythm, and eventually stops you completely. The men who win operate differently. They remove alternatives. They design their environment in a way where execution is the only path forward. There's no comfortable fallback, no easy escape, no second route waiting if things get difficult. That level of commitment forces clarity. It sharpens focus. It creates a situation where your only job is to move forward regardless of how you feel. Understand this clearly: when you eliminate options, you eliminate excuses. You don't wake up and debate whether you're going to act, because there is no other choice. You've already decided. That decision was made once with full certainty, and now you follow through without revisiting it. That's where real consistency comes from. Not from daily motivation, but from a fixed structure that leaves no room for negotiation. Most people are uncomfortable with this idea because it removes their sense of control over comfort. They want the ability to opt out. They want to keep one foot in and one foot out so they can retreat when things get tough. But that mindset guarantees mediocrity. You cannot operate at a high level while constantly preparing to escape. The two are incompatible. When you commit fully, something shifts. Your focus intensifies because the stakes feel real. Your actions become sharper because there's no room for hesitation. You start solving problems instead of avoiding them, because avoiding them is no longer an option. Pressure stops being something you fear and becomes something that drives you. This doesn't mean acting recklessly. It means being decisive. It means setting a direction and removing anything that weakens your commitment to it. It means cutting off the habits, distractions, and fallback plans that give you permission to slow down. You build a system where your environment, your schedule, and your standards all point in one direction forward. The truth is simple. If you still have a comfortable way out, you will take it. Not every time, but enough times to break your consistency. And consistency is fragile. It doesn't survive repeated compromises. It requires pressure, structure, and clarity. It requires a mindset that says there is no alternative, no retreat, no second option, only execution. Every single time, you don't have an information problem. You have an execution problem. You already know what needs to be done, and pretending otherwise is just another form of avoidance. You've watched the videos, read the advice, listen to the strategies. You understand the basics. Work harder, stay consistent, eliminate distractions, follow a routine. None of this is new. Yet you keep searching, keep consuming, keep telling yourself that the next piece of information will finally unlock something. It won't. There's a moment where learning stops being productive and starts becoming a shield, a way to feel like you're progressing without actually doing anything. You convince yourself that you're preparing, that you're getting ready, that you're building the perfect plan. But in reality, you're delaying action, because action is uncomfortable. Action exposes you. Action forces you to confront your weaknesses in real time, without excuses. Look at your behavior honestly. How many times have you said, "I just need to learn a bit more before I start"? That statement feels intelligent, but it's often fear disguised as preparation. You're not lacking knowledge. You're avoiding the responsibility that comes with using it. Because once you act, there's no hiding. You either perform or you don't. And most people would rather stay in the safe zone of learning than risk the discomfort of execution. Execution is where everything changes. It's where theory meets reality. It's where you find out what actually works and what doesn't. But it's also where you face resistance, fatigue, distraction, doubt. And if you're not used to pushing through those things, you retreat. You go back to consuming information because it feels productive without demanding anything from you. The truth is, you don't need a perfect plan. You need movement, imperfect, consistent, direct action. You adjust as you go. You learn by doing, not by endlessly preparing. Every time you delay execution, you lose momentum. And momentum is everything. Once it's broken, it's harder to rebuild. That's why people get stuck in cycles. They start, stop, overthink, and restart again. There's also a deeper issue: accountability. When you stay in the phase of learning, you don't have to answer for results. You can always say, "I'm still figuring things out." But once you commit to execution, results become visible, measurable. You can't hide from them. And that level of exposure makes people uncomfortable. It forces them to confront reality instead of imagining progress. You need to shift your focus from consuming to producing, from planning to doing, from thinking to dishing. Set a direction and move. Not when you feel ready, not when everything is clear now. Because clarity comes from action, not the other way around. You don't think your way into progress, you work your way into it. The gap between where you are and where you want to be is not filled with more knowledge. It's filled with repeated, consistent execution, doing the same things over and over, even when they're boring, even when they're difficult, even when you don't feel like it. That's what builds results. That's what creates momentum. That's what separates people who talk from people who actually move forward. If you're still searching for answers, you're wasting time. You already have enough. What you're missing is the willingness to act on it without hesitation. And until you fix that, no amount of information will change your outcome. You say you want better results, but your standards are negotiable. That's the contradiction. You expect a high-level outcome while operating with low-level rules. You let things slide, you make exceptions, you allow small compromises, and then you're surprised when your life reflects that inconsistency. Results don't come from what you say you want. They come from what you tolerate daily. Every time you lower your standard even slightly, you send a signal to yourself that average is acceptable. You skip a task, delay an action, cut a corner, and you justify it. It's just today. It won't matter. That thinking is exactly what builds a pattern, and patterns define outcomes. Not one decision, not one mistake, but the repeated acceptance of less than your best. High standards are not about intensity once in a while. They're about consistency at all times. They're about doing what's required, even when no one is watching, even when there's no immediate reward, even when it feels repetitive and boring. Most people can perform at a high level occasionally. Very few can maintain it daily. That's the separation. You don't drift into excellence. You enforce it. You decide what is acceptable and what is not. And then you hold that line without exception. That means no emotional decisions, no last-minute adjustments based on how you feel, no bending the rules when things get uncomfortable. Your standards must be fixed, not flexible, because the moment they become flexible, they lose their power. Look at the areas where you're inconsistent. It's not because you're incapable. It's because you've allowed a lower standard to exist there. You've accepted inconsistency as part of your identity, and once something becomes acceptable, it becomes normal. You stop fighting it. You start living with it. That's how average becomes permanent. Raising your standards changes everything, but it also comes with pressure. When your expectations increase, your margin for error decreases. You can't hide behind excuses anymore. You can't justify poor performance. You either meet the standard or you fall short. And that level of accountability is uncomfortable for most people. That's why they avoid it. But here's the reality. If your standards don't demand more from you, your life won't give more back. You will stay exactly where you are, repeating the same routines, producing the same results, because nothing is forcing you to rise. There's no internal pressure pushing you forward. You're operating in a system that allows you to remain average. When your standards are absolute, your behavior changes automatically. You don't debate whether to act, you act because anything less is unacceptable. You don't look for shortcuts. You follow through because cutting corners violates your own rules. You become disciplined not because you're trying harder, but because your identity doesn't allow anything else. This is where real separation happens. Not in talent, not in opportunity, but in standards. The difference between those who win and those who don't is simple. They refuse to tolerate mediocrity in any form. They don't negotiate with their goals. They don't adjust their expectations to match their comfort. They raise themselves to meet the standard every single time. If you're stuck in most mediocrity with flexible rules, you're choosing average whether you admit it or not. Because average lives in the space where standards are optional, where effort is inconsistent, where excuses are allowed. And as long as that space exists in your life, you will remain inside it, producing results that match it exactly. Most people will never reach this level. They'll stay trapped in cycles: start, stop, regret, repeat. They'll blame time, energy, circumstances. But the truth is simple. They never change their language. So they never change their language. So they never change themselves. You want consistency? Stop chasing motivation. Stop pretending you're trying. Decide who you are, rewrite your internal code, and act like a man who has no alternative. Because in the end, consistency isn't a skill, it's a standard. And if you don't meet it, you don't rise, you disappear.